Early Church Fathers, September 27th, readings. Tertullian, De Praescriptione Hereticorum, chapters 4 to 6. Let us be mindful, I say, above all, of the Lord's own warnings and of the apostolic letters. They foresaw that heresies would arise, and they supplied us in advance with cautions and tests so that we might avoid them. If we are not surprised that errors exist, we must not be surprised either that they can work ruin. Rather, we should be on our guard against the means by which they deceive. The Lord himself warns us of false teachers in terms that leave no doubt about their danger. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. Matthew 7:15. What are those sheep's garments but the outward shows of Christian profession? What are those ravening wolves but the crafty spirits and false perceptions that lurk within and prey upon the flock? What are false prophets but smooth talkers who feign insight into the future? What are false apostles but those who proclaim a counterfeit gospel? What are antichrists now and always but those who revolt against Christ and set themselves as rivals to the truth? Heresies, then, do the church the same harm by corrupting doctrine as Antichrist will one day do by open violence. Persecution may make martyrs, but heresy makes apostates. The presence of error serves a providential purpose. It reveals the proven. Paul himself recognizes that divisions and dissensions occur, and he adds heresies to that list, not to commend them, but to note that by God's permission, such trials appear so that the faithful who remain may be manifested. For there must be factions among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest. 1 Corinthians 11:19. This is no endorsement of factionalism. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that, if trials and errors appear, they will prove who stands firm. Some misread Paul and twist his exhortation, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good," into a license to experiment with doctrine until one settles on error. Yet his meaning is the reverse. Test carefully, but cling to that which is sound. The emergence of heresies does not make them good. It makes them, for the elect, a trial that distinguishes the approved from the unapproved. Warnings in the shape of Christian unity. When Paul reproves dissensions and schisms, he does not exempt heresy. He groups them together because both sever the unity of the church. He therefore expects us to be on our guard against the subtler danger of doctrinal seduction, as well as the more visible danger of faction. The apostle's insistence that all should speak the same thing and be of one mind is the direct opposite of what heresy achieves. Hence, he classes heresy with schism precisely because both work against that unity. Let all things be done decently and in order. See that all speak and think the same thing. 1 Corinthians 14:40, Philippians 2. To fall into heresy is to fall from the Catholic faith into private opinion. By such a choice one proves himself unapproved, for the faithful are those whom trials do not estrange from the truth but rather confirm. The apostle's doctrine is consistently corrective. He names heresy among the disorders of the flesh and commands that such persons be warned and, if they persist, rejected. This sternness shows that heresy is not merely an intellectual mistake, but a moral failing, a willful turning away from the apostolic deposit. Thus, I insist, faith is not a private preference, but submission of the will to divine authority as it has been delivered by the apostles. We possess no right to introduce novelties of doctrine. The apostles did not act on private judgment, but on the commission they received from Christ, and therefore any pretended innovation must be tested by that apostolic rule. The choice of error and the example of appels. Paul's words are plain when he counsels Titus concerning the man who is a heretic. A man that is an heretic, after the first and second admonition, reject. Titus 3:10. This instruction presupposes that the heretic is self-condemned. He has deliberately chosen the path that merits rejection. The Greek term translated heresy signifies a taking, a choice, and so the heretic is he who both adopts and teaches a private opinion as though it were the apostolic rule. In calling such a person self-condemned, I affirm that his condemnation proceeds from his own will. He has embraced a doctrine contrary to that which the Lord and the apostles faithfully delivered. Even if an angel from heaven were to preach a gospel other than what the apostles proclaimed, we must mark him accursed, for the apostolic doctrine is the final test. But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. Galatians 1:8. History supplies us with sad examples. Apelles was persuaded by the specious marvels of a deceitful spirit, an angel of light, and so introduced his error. Such cases show that miracles and wonders are not the seal of apostolic truth. Rather, the criterion is conformity to the apostolic teaching. When a teacher departs from that rule, however impressive his signs, he betrays himself. We must therefore be vigilant. Cherish not your own preferences. Cherish the faith once delivered. Test all things in the light of the apostolic witness. Hold fast that which is good, and be swift to admonish and, if necessary, to separate from those who make a choice for error. In this way, the Church preserves its unity and reveals those who are approved under the trials that God, in His wisdom, permits. Augustine of Hippo, the Confessions, Book 11, Chapter 3, Genesis 1:3 of light, he understands as it is seen in the spiritual creature. But what thou saidst in the beginning of the creation, let there be light, and there was light, Genesis 1:3, I do not unfitly understand of the spiritual creature, because there was even then a kind of life which thou mightest illuminate. But as it had not deserved of thee that it should be such a life as could be enlightened, so neither, when it already was, hath it deserved of thee that it should be enlightened. For neither could its formlessness be pleasing unto thee, unless it became light, not by merely existing, but by beholding the illuminating light and cleaving unto it. So also, that it lives and lives happily, it owes to nothing whatsoever but to thy grace, being converted by means of a better change unto that which can be changed neither into better nor into worse. On the nature of spiritual light, the which thou only art, because thou only simply art, to whom it is not one thing to live, another to live blessedly, since thou art thyself thine own blessedness. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, Part 1-2, Question 10. Of enjoyment, which is an act of the will, question. Of enjoyment, which is an act of the will, questions. Objection 1. It would seem that enjoyment is not an act of the appetitive power, but of the intellect. For enjoyment appears to be the reception of the fruit that perfects life, and the intellect is that power in whose act human happiness consists. Therefore, enjoyment belongs to the intellectual appetite rather than to the will. Objection 2. Further, enjoyment pertains to the last end alone. Things that are enjoyed seem to be those goods in which perfect happiness consists. But irrational animals cannot attain the last end. Therefore, enjoyment is proper to rational creatures alone. Objection 3. Moreover, enjoyment appears to be only of the end possessed. Augustine says that to enjoy is to use joyfully, with the joy not of hope but of possession. Therefore, enjoyment would seem to be only of what is already had, not of things merely intended. Objection 4. Finally, enjoyment seems to differ from love. If enjoyment were merely a species of love, then it would be indistinguishable from other affective acts. But Aquinas elsewhere distinguishes volition, enjoyment, and intention as distinct acts with respect to the end. Hence, enjoyment cannot be a distinct act of the will. Responsio, I answer that, by the will's proper acts with respect to the end, three things are to be distinguished. Volition, the will's bringing itself to the end. Enjoyment, the will's resting in the end as possessed. And intention, the will's directing the apprehensive powers to the end. In this sense, enjoyment is properly an act of the appetitive power, for it belongs to loving and to adhering to a good for its own sake. Augustine states as much. To enjoy is to adhere lovingly to something for its own sake. And since love belongs to the appetitive faculty, enjoyment must be reckoned among its acts. Enjoyment is not confined to the intellect as if it were purely cognitive. Rather, the intellect and will cooperate. The intellect apprehends the good, and the will enjoys it by cleaving to it. Thus, the fact that the intellect apprehends the ultimate fruit does not remove enjoyment from the appetitive power. Indeed, the higher the apprehension, the more perfect the enjoyment, since enjoyment presupposes the goods being apprehended and loved. As to whether enjoyment belongs to irrational animals, one must distinguish kinds of enjoyment. Irrational animals enjoy sensible goods, food, warmth, etc., because they have a lower appetite that cleaves to sensible goods. But enjoyment ordered to the last end, enjoyment of the beatific good, belongs only to rational creatures, for the last end requires intellectual apprehension and the vision of the uncreated good. Nevertheless, enjoyment as an act, that is, the will's cleaving with delight to what it has, is not absolutely foreign to animals. It is the dignity and direction of the object that differentiates the kinds of enjoyment. Concerning whether enjoyment is only of the end possessed, enjoyment properly presupposes possession in some sense, for enjoyment is the joy of possession rather than the hope of possession. But the will's acts are not limited to a single instant. The will can enjoy things in various modes. The perfected enjoyment of the beatific vision is indeed possession, but there is a mode in which the will takes an anticipatory delight in goods that are present to the apprehension. Thus enjoyment is primarily of what is possessed, yet not confined to corporal or defective possession, when the intellect's apprehension yields a form of spiritual possession. Finally, the distinction among volition, enjoyment, and intention is real but complementary. Enjoyment is a distinct mode of the will's act, being the will's repose in the good once it is apprehended and loved. It differs from volition, which is the movement toward the end, and from intention, which orders the apprehensive power. All three belong to the appetitive life of the rational soul, but they are distinct aspects of how the will relates to ends. Therefore, enjoyment is to be reckoned an act of the appetitive power, that is, of the will, properly speaking. It admits degrees corresponding to the nobility of the object enjoyed, and it is only in rational creatures that enjoyment can be ordered to the last end in a wholly adequate way. Quick summa enjoyment, fruitia, is an act of the will. The will's repose and delight in a good, apprehended and loved, distinct from volition, movement toward the end, and from intention, the ordering of the apprehensive powers. William at the window. William sat long at his study window, the late light of evening passing slowly over his open books. He had turned that day from abstract disputations to the pressing questions of life. What does it mean actually to enjoy the things I seek? He closed the book, and in the silence, asked himself whether his pursuit of knowledge had ever been more than the restless motion of the will toward a further good. In memory, he saw his father at table, savoring a simple meal with a gratitude that was almost prayer. The father's face, content and full, struck William as a picture of the will at rest, not merely the having of bread, but the thankful, affectionate cleaving to it. There was enjoyment there, small and sensible, yet real. William recognized that his own delights often wore the guise of eagerness, an appetite not yet satisfied, whereas the Father's delight was the will's settlement, a repose that acknowledged the goodness present. William understood then how different ranks of enjoyment correspond to different kinds of goods. The pleasure of food is a genuine enjoyment. The friendship that makes a home is a deeper enjoyment. But the repose in God, the peace that does not seek but rests, is the enjoyment proper to the rational soul's last end. He resolved, not as a mere resolution of the intellect, but with the will's assent, to seek that higher enjoyment by ordering his loves rightly, to let the intellect see and the will rest, so that knowledge and delight might meet in a single, lasting possession of the good. In the end, William's lesson was simple and practical. To desire rightly is to move rightly. To enjoy rightly is to rest rightly. And to order those acts is the work of the soul fashioned by grace.